Welcome to Shoresides, a podcast where we explore the North Carolina coastal region's past, present, and future to promote community resilience. Each year, hundreds of thousands of people head for North Carolina's coastal beaches. They want to take in sun and surf, but as the temperatures soar, they also look for shade. Among the umbrella and tent people, you might have noticed a new kind of beachgoer emerging. Today, we'll talk to writer Johanna F. Still about her recent article for The Assembly, Shibumi Shades Have Taken Over NC Beaches. Welcome back, Johanna. Glad to have you stop by again.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
So my first question is, what exactly is a Shibumi, and whether I'm saying that right?
Yes, you are pronouncing it correctly. It's Shibumi, and it is not an umbrella, not a canopy, not a tent, but it is a whole entirely new category of beach shade. If you've been on the North Carolina beaches anytime in the past few years, you have certainly seen one. They are blue, two-tone blue, except they just released a new color, but that might be, getting into it a little bit too early there, but they are a shade. So it's a crescent-shaped, if you think about camping, the poles that you connect for camping, it's a pole like that, shaped in a crescent shape, shoved in the sand with a thin fabric flowing behind that is actually working with the wind. That's sort of their tagline. And it is a alternative to kind of clunky tents and canopies that people slug out to beaches when they want to spend hours hanging out and not getting sunburned.
Sure. And, I guess I picture it as kind of almost like a flag-like object.
Yeah, it's very
Where
similar.
this sounds like a pretty nice product. So what are we talking about in terms of cost, first of all?
So they are pretty steep, I'd say. The classic version right now, which is I guess you could say their older version, or the version that you are probably seeing all across the beaches, that's about $250 right now. And that's at a discount. They have a newer shade that they released, which is supposed to be a quieter fabric. That's on sale for $275. And they also released, I think a couple years ago, a mini, so a smaller version. And that's for, if you're just a couple people and you don't want to shell out quite as much money, that's $195.
Yeah, that's probably a little out of my price range, but at the same time, as we learn more about it, maybe I'll be sold on it.
It's a commitment for sure.
Do we have any idea what that name means?
Yeah, so it is named after. So they're the three founders. They went to Chapel Hill and they lived in an apartment complex named Shibumi. And I guess that must have been fresh in their brain, fresh in their mind. When they first launched that first year in business, like 2016, they were called the Shade Wave. And so it wasn't until 2017 that they changed the name to Shibumi. And it also means it's some Japanese concept for elegance and simplicity. And so when they talk about it, they, pay homage to the fact that they lived in this place called Shibumi, and that it also means this, this meaning. It has this meaning that they think embodies their product.
One thing I wanted to bring up is that, we both have backgrounds as journalists, and we've just spent time in these kind of media pitch sessions that you have to do usually for me when I was a reporter weekly, where you try to get editorial approval for whatever story you want to work on. And the trend piece was always particularly tough to get approval on because, it's really easy for journalists to end up making a big deal about nothing, and editors hate that. But I wanted to say from a trip that I recently took to Carolina Beach that that's not the case with this story. I saw these things everywhere.
Yeah.
So how and why has Shibumi become such a phenomenon?
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring that up because one thing that I think that a lot of reporters or just the industry should be doing, and certainly a lot of us are already doing, is being cognizant of what's already been covered, right, and what's out there. And so, similar to what you references, kind of avoiding a trend piece that forecasts something that might not end up happening. I think at the same time, I have a reluctance to wanting to cover something that's already been covered, right? So that was my biggest holdup for this story. Was worrying that that it had already been done, and so, but I had this sort of hunch or feeling that I wanted to give the Shibumi phenomenon the assembly treatment. And when I say that, I mean we are known for like longer dives, really like digging into a subject. And so I know they've been covered, right? I know this company's been covered, and it's certainly, it's not a news desert in that regard. However, what I wanted, I just had this feeling like I wanted to just really, really dig into what the heck is happening. Because if you walk on the beach, it's a cultural phenomenon, right? It's really wild. And especially if you've been here for a while and you remember what it used to look like, it's like night and day. So I took that with me. My editors were like, "Yeah, totally do it." So I was happy about that. And I am glad that in, digging into it, I was able to figure out and bring more light to what's been happening behind the scenes that was not already covered. So I was, that made me feel better about it, in terms of like the editorial process. But like you mentioned, so why do this story? Why is it everywhere? I think it's really interesting consumer behavior. I certainly attribute some of the success to people embracing the North Carolina element of the brand, right? So I think people kind of know, maybe they've read stories, they kind of feel, and then in the original Shibumis, there's this tag that says "sewn in North Carolina." So I think that they got a little, I guess somebody else called it a home turf advantage. I think they had a little of
Yeah,
that going to
hometown
it.
heroes there.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think people bought into that a little bit, and then I think that they also have what is totally inevitable is this just insane marketing advantage, right? For having these blue shades that are totally different, nobody's seen them before, and they're everywhere. And so Dane Barnes, who's the co-founder of the company, has told me the best way to sell a Shibumi is to see a Shibumi, and so they're selling themselves, right, just by being out there on the beach.
Right. Yeah, I can say that during my beach trip, I screwed a very awkwardly weighted umbrella into the beach sand, and then worried about it toppling the
Mm,
entire time.
mm-hmm.
And at one point, really kind of lost control of it when a big gust of wind came by.
Oh my God.
So, yeah, so I certainly noticed as I carted that umbrella by the folks who were kind of leisurely under a Shibumi. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
maybe there's like a
yeah.
club element to it too, like wanting to be part of the club. I'm not sure.
Sure. Yeah, there has to be some camaraderie there. Yeah. Uh, so tell me a little about the origin story of this company. You mentioned that they all went to school together. Um, Tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, so it's two brothers and their best friend. They were all UNC students, UNC grads, and this is after they had graduated. They would spend their summers with their family vacationing in Emerald Isle. And they just for personal reasons, just, to make their life with their family more enjoyable, they set out to kind of, create their own version with, simple materials, PVC pipe and fabric, because they just got so tired of, hunking and lugging over these giant canopies. And if you're the one who's tasked with setting it up, it's, probably frustrating or takes a long time, and just all of the hoops you have to jump through to make sure it stays up and gets in the right place and all that. So they just, for their own reason, searched up some YouTube videos and decided, let's figure this out. So their new contraption attracted a lot of natural attention on the beach. And so I've said this before, but they didn't set out to start a company. They just did this for their family and for themselves, right? And when they started getting attraction from people just walking up, asking questions, that's when they kind of started looking at each other thinking, maybe we should, actually do something about this. We should actually start a company. And one of the founders, Dane Barnes, had studied entrepreneurship. And so I imagine that his wheels were already turning. So that helped kind of have his mind was primed to take this new thing that they had created in a serious fashion.
Yeah, yeah. So it sounds like, as opposed to the kind of startup culture origin story that we usually hear, where folks are in a scrum and looking for an idea to make them a whole bunch of profit. Uh, this came about quite organically, like almost in the old way, the way things were often in the past, kind of accidentally invented out of need as opposed to ambition.
Totally. Yeah, this certainly would fit in what you described as the latter category. They all had day jobs, and they didn't even leave their day jobs until 2019. And they had sales coming in the door. They were already getting a lot of notoriety, and just they were already picking up a lot of steam before they felt ready to ditch their day jobs, which is interesting because some people would have ditched them a lot earlier. And I think I've heard Dane say in previous interviews that it wasn't, a lot of times people make the jump to quit and go full time for their venture, that they are taking a risk. And he said at the time, because of the steam they'd already picked up, it didn't feel like a risk at all.
Wow. So, and tell me what the geography of all this looks like. Like, what beaches have shibumis become prevalent on, and how do we know that?
So certainly North Carolina, just point blank, all across North Carolina, sure. They are everywhere. You can't avoid them. They have also, if you imagine them like I've heard them described as kudzu, they kind of just crawl up and down the shore and along the eastern shoreline. I mean, they say that they have been purchased for 800 beaches. So they are definitely scattered about, but certainly the concentration they've won North Carolina for sure. They are creeping into other southern states. They're creeping north as well, but certainly their concentration is right now in North Carolina. And what the company hopes to do is to take over all of the coastlines.
Wow. Yeah, that kudzu comparison is pretty interesting. I'm assuming that that's not part of their messaging, considering the connotations.
I
So,
did. I thought about how to describe it, and I thought maybe like a dandelion or something. I ran the dandelion thing by Dane, and I think they hadn't quite come up with a plant metaphor
right.
yet that would make them, that sits with them. But kudzu, it has to be accurate. I mean, it's invasive
Oh
and it's
yeah,
everywhere,
exactly. It happens to be very apt,
Yeah,
but yeah, I love it. I don't love kudzu, but
yeah,
I love the analog.
yeah.
Uh, so why aren't there any shabumis? I'm still
There you
struggling a
go.
little bit with
Yep.
the pronunciation on Myrtle Beach in South Carolina.
Right. So the politicians down there, they have various bans. And I want to be clear, it's not a Shibumi ban. They had rules against tents and canopies that predate the even formation of the company, but they haven't changed the rules, since the company has exploded. So they're still staying firm in their pretty much, umbrella only rules. There's different municipalities in the Myrtle Beach area that surround Myrtle Beach. So it's, but very generally speaking, you can only have umbrellas in the summertime. Some of the municipalities ban them all year round. And so Shibumi, the company, has really tried, and I'm sure customers have really tried to get those politicians to change the rules, but they have not yet. Actually, politicians in Ocean Isle Beach and in Sunset Beach over the past few years have changed their rules that were on the books prior to Shibumi's formation to accommodate for the Shibumi. So that was interesting. They made ordinances I think it calls them wind-powered shading devices. So there's a few companies that would fit that description, but clearly, I mean, it's a Shibumi-shaped ordinance that they made just to accommodate for them. But the Myrtle Beach politicians say that these large shade devices, not just Shibumis, but the large shading things, they obstruct the ability for public safety to access the water. And I'm surely Shibumi pushes back against that, but that is the reason for why they have those bans in Myrtle Beach.
Right. So wind shaded devices?
Wind powered shading
Wind
devices. Yeah, that's the
wind powered.
specific language in their
Uh,
ordinance. Yeah, it's interesting.
yeah, bureaucracy
You
has
know it.
such an
You know it.
interesting nomenclature. So yeah, so one thing I wanted to ask was, you mentioned that Shibumi wasn't specifically being targeted.
Yeah.
Uh, what were they targeting? I know that there are some camps out there on the beach.
Yeah, big
Uh,
tents. I think I would say
yeah.
like big tents. They say what they do allow is what they call like a baby tent. So a really tiny tent for an infant or little baby is okay. But the idea is just that public safety. If you imagine, I guess what are they on ATVs, lifeguards, that they can't get to the beach, they can't cross over the sand right in time or in a quick fashion. So that's where they think that it just clogs up the beach. And I heard from the mayor of Myrtle Beach too. She also made an aesthetic argument that it just looks better without all these tents everywhere, which is certainly subjective.
And so that's not the only conflict Shibumi is currently involved in. What are some of the other tensions that are emerging? Like there's something with intellectual property, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I would say that would be their number one challenge right now. But they are doing well in that regard. So they have 15 patents, and they clearly believe, and the United States government has given the stamp of approval that what they have created is innovative. There have been some competitors who have released products that are very, very similar, and Shibumi has sued them to stop them from selling the product. There's two in particular that have Shibumi has filed federal lawsuits against to enforce their intellectual property rights, and they've been successful so far. There's one still pending, and I talked to the guy behind one of the companies who is it's Sunsail, and he has an interesting perspective. Right, we put this in our piece, and he very clearly feels that Shibumi has a monopoly on this category of the beach shade industry. He feels that it's anti-competitive, right? He thinks that by the government allowing and sanctioning this monopoly, right, that it's hurting consumers because what he's offering, he thinks, is a cheaper alternative. And on flip side for Shibumi, at least for a different company, which had basically a copycat that they were ruled in favor of Shibumi, the judge ruled in favor of Shibumi. The copycat was on Amazon before them. It was cheaper. And so Shibumi disclosed in that lawsuit that it had hurt their sales and that they had to lower their price because of it. And so it's an interesting dynamic, I think, for sure. And I spoke to an intellectual property expert because I was really interested in that tension that between, respecting and, honoring innovation versus consumer rights through competition. I found that tension to be very, very fascinating. And so that's kind of what I explored here too.
Okay. And then finally, so, great work for, first of all, I think, you did it exactly right. There have been some coverage out there, but then the gift that long form gives is the ability to be sweeping and definitive. And I think your piece really was, as well as comprehensive. So wanted to ask what inspired you to cover this story, which you talked a little about already, and also the sort of reactions you've gotten.
Thank you, first of all. And I did get into why I wanted to do it. So I'll just skip to the reactions, which is really absolutely mind blowing. I hope I'm okay to say this. It's the most viewed story in assembly history, which just doesn't really make sense. We've done some
It
really,
does.
I guess it's just the absolute, just the ubiquity of these things. So people are connecting to them, even if you're not on the coast. I don't really quite know. It got republished in Slate. I still am trying to make sense of it, but I think that a huge takeaway has been just the utter natural marketing power that this company has. I mean, you talk about earned media. This is, they've just got so much exposure, and just I've never received as much feedback just from readers and just the general public from a piece as this. And I think, it is important. I would say it's important, but at the same time, we've done some really, investigative stuff on other topics that, affect our day-to-day lives. And, that certainly doesn't get a fraction of the attention. So that has been interesting. And I guess, what was it? Our most viewed story, we did disclose this already, but in, 2023, was about cheese biscuits. So I think people are burnt out from like regular news, which is fair. Of course, we're all a little burnt out. So sometimes the more cultural stories seem to resonate more.
Yeah, I think culture, is part of, we know about the New York Times having kind of like gamified itself and making a lot of progress, like kind of showing people recipes,
Right.
and giving them like a new crossword puzzle every day, which I do. And yeah, it also, I think, makes sense. Like part of what you contributed is, I think, about the fact that communities, in the end, always generate their own news. Like they already know what's important, what about what's happening in their realities, and for the most part, as like people who are journalists, they're waiting for us to amplify and echo things that they kind of already know, so that we can, I think, feel like we're in the public conversation and also closer together, right?
Yeah,
So,
that's
and
beautiful.
yeah, well, no, it's all about the fact that you have this skill set where you're able to deliver that to people. Like you can sort of encapsulate those things that they're in need of hearing.
It
Even
stinks though, like when when it's something like say climate change, for example, or Trump, that readers are, and when I say readers, I just mean people who consume news, they're so burnt out, so you could do
yes,
something, you could work really
exactly.
hard, you could spend months on something, and then it just lands with a thud. And
Yeah,
we
yeah.
are it's a really struggling industry. And so when stuff lands with a thud, it makes, I'm sure the business side isn't happy about you wasting that time. So it's unfortunate. It's a difficult thread for sure.
Oh yeah, yeah, and then like investigative journalism is so valuable. I think it almost always has an impact. Usually it's not necessarily one that can be measured in clicks.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
yeah. But hey, please keep doing what you're doing, both the clickable and the unclickable.
Yeah.
And yeah, thanks for being with us. We hope you all gained a deeper understanding of the challenges and triumphs experienced by the vibrant communities of coastal North Carolina. Remember, the stories we explain here shape the path ahead. Thanks for listening. Learn more about Shoresides at www.shoresides.org. I'm Rend Smith. Again, thanks for listening.